Hi, I'm A,
And I am M.
and we're doing The Makings of Modern Britain, 1951 to 2007. The topic today is the Affluent Society, Conservative Governments.
From 1951, the Conservatives were dominant for 13 years. So who was in power then? So Labour actually won more votes, getting 48.8% compared to Conservatives' 48%, than the Conservative Party, but the first past-the-post electoral system meant the Conservative Party won the most seats, earning them 321 seats compared to Labour's 295 in the general election of that year, and Winston Churchill became the new Conservative PM.
Winston Churchill was Prime Minister from 1951 to 1955. He had a good reputation with the public as a wartime Prime Minister. And he understood the parties, both Liberal and Conservative, as he was part of both of them at some point in time. Cons. He had impaired speech due to a stroke he had in 1953 and considered himself more of an international statesman. So he spent more time abroad meeting world leaders and relaxing at his favourite holiday spots. He was not focused on domestic matters and instead focused on war, and he was constantly absent from government. Many Labour politicians regarded Churchill as a tired old force and believed that the Conservatives would struggle with intense economic difficulties that Britain often faced. They were wrong, however, as Labour would not return to power for another 13 years. Anthony Eden was Prime Minister from 1955 to 1957. He had a good reputation and was considered a political rising star, and he also had experience being Prime Minister in Churchill's absence. However, he had a lack of interest in domestic affairs, and his reputation was later damaged due to the Suez Crisis in 1956. He had a lack of knowledge on economic issues and was anxious with a lack of control over his party. Another pro was that he increased the Conservative Party seats from 17 to 60, and under this, Butler became Chancellor and Macmillan became his Foreign Secretary.
Howard Macmillan was PM from 1957 to 1963. He was a safe choice with little enemies and was remembered to have opposed POA, the policy of appeasement. He was fully in control of his party and had a brilliant reputation, nicknamed as Super Mac. He also led the Conservatives to victory in 1959, winning majority with 365 seats. He also controlled media using new political opportunities provided by TV with flair.
R.A. Butler, or Rab, was Chancellor from 1951 to 1955 and Home Secretary from 1959. He was considered the best Prime Minister the Conservatives never had, and he also introduced the 1944 Education Act, which proved his experience with legislation. However, even though he was popular with his country, he was not popular with his party. His reputation was damaged as he introduced tax cuts shortly before the 1955 election, which had to be reversed, and which overheated the economy. He also approved of and was involved in policy of appeasement, which was seen as negative in a post-World War II world. As well as this, these people were all rivals and didn't get along.
So domestic policies in the 1950s and the post-war consensus. The post-war consensus highlighted major issues to be tackled after World War I. Firstly, mixed economy, state and private enterprise. Secondly, support for NHS and welfare state. Thirdly, ensure full employment, avoid 1930s issue. And fourth, working with trade unions and employers. There's a task if you want to take a minute to pause and complete. Define what a mixed economy and a welfare state is.
The domestic policies under the Conservative governments included housing, education and social reform. So your second task is, who are the Prime Ministers in this time that oversaw these policies?
Housing. In 1951, there was a promise to build 300,000 houses a year. To rebuild the housing stock and replace slums, Macmillan oversaw the success of this. Again, there's another task with a video on housing.
Education. This was developed off a tripartite system of the Butler Act of 1944. This included grammar, technical schools, and secondary modern schools. Grammar schools were viewed as for the intellectually gifted, technical for vocational skills, and comprehensive gave basic education to the majority, although, due to financial restraints, technical schools were often overlooked. The Education Act also introduced the 11+ exam, but by the 1960s, some began to question these reforms.
Social reform. The Clean Air Act of 1956 was aimed to prevent smog. Housing and Factory Acts 1956 to improve living and working conditions. The Homicide Act of 1957 restricted when the death penalty should be imposed. The Wolf-Enden Commission 1957 recommended that homosexual behaviour should no longer be a criminal act. Again, these issues would return in the 1960s.
Okay, divisions in the Labour Party, 1951 to 1964. There were many dividing issues in the Labour Party during this time, and after Attlee resigned in 1955, they became more prevalent. These issues were mainly to do with Gaitskell and Bevan and the divide between them. But Attlee had ill health, so Labour leadership was rocky even before he resigned.
Prescription charges. Labour left, Bevan did not support prescription charges and were known as Bevanites. Labour right, Gaitskell, supported prescription charges. The outcome was a walkout from left, previously under attack of proposed PC, prescription charges. Gaitskell eventually introduced them in 1951. Another outcome was 2 cabinet ministers resigned in protest. Bevan, architect of the Health Service, and Harold Wilson, the future PM. This crisis provoked a running battle between left and right wing of the Labour Party. This lasted for 40 years. There's another task to be completed. What did this go against that was formed after the First World War?
So, Clause 4, nationalism. Labour left supported this and stopped Gaitskell from abolishing it. Labour right opposed it, so Gaitskell wanted it abolished and proposed this in 1959. The overall outcome was that Gaitskell backed down from putting a vote in against it and was overpowered by Labour left and union leaders, so Frank Cousins, as pictured on the right, support of Clause 4. Task, so another task, define nationalism.
Nuclear weapons. Labour left, many joined the campaign for nuclear disarmament. Labour right, Gaitskell supported nuclear weapons, and in a conference in Scarborough, 1960, he tried to convince the Labour Party not to support UND. The outcome was they lost the vote against UND, overturned this in 1960 in his favour. Also, Gaitskell backed down without putting it to vote. The Scarborough Conference 1960 became a legend in Labour's history because of Hugh Gaitskell's emotional speech when trying to convince the party to reject unilateral nuclear deterrent. Task: watch this video of Gaitskell's speech against unilateral disarmament. So now we're going to look at reasons for Conservatives' fall from power.
From 1961 to 1963, numerous events caused Supermac to lose his grip on government. So, another task, write down all you can remember about Macmillan from earlier on in the video in a spider diagram.
Firstly, Britain applied to the EEC in 1961 but was rejected in 1963. Task: what does EEC stand for?
Supermac had lost his political touch, and in July 1962 he radically reshuffled his cabinet. He sacked a third of it. This was known as the Night of the Long Knives. It was intended to rejuvenate his government, but instead it weakened it. Macmillan's nickname changed from Supermac to Mac the Knife.
Fourthly, the Profumo affair. in 1963 involved Macmillan's Secretary of State for War, who slept with Christine Keeler, who was sleeping with a Soviet spy. So, Cold War secrets could have been leaked. This led to John Profumo being forced to resign. Another task? Watch this video on the Profumo affair.
Macmillan and his government seemed increasingly out of touch from these events, and Macmillan resigned in 1963 after an abdominal operation. But he had not prepared for a successor, so this led to a power struggle. There was opposition to Rab or Lord Hailsham being in charge, so Lord Holmes stepped forward, which just made them seem increasingly more out of touch. So another task, thinking back on what we previously covered, why do you think Rab being in charge was opposed to? So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.